Hey everybody, this is Erica, the technology nerd who likes to film stuff, and finally, I know it's a bit delayed, but it's time for the Moto G review, as even though there's all these flagships that are coming out, we can't look past the Moto G. This is a really great phone for a very great price, and if you're somebody who just doesn't want one of those flagships, this phone is absolutely excellent. I have really enjoyed my time with it. I want to do an in-depth review looking at everything from, of course, the build quality, which I can tell you is fantastical. I was able to put this underneath water for 30 minutes. Nothing happened to it. And of course, I want to take a look at the performance. One thing I do not want to compare it to is the Moto X, because this is not the Moto X, and I find it very hard to really compare them at all, except for maybe the appearance. I want to talk about the camera, I want to talk about the battery life. So if you're curious at all about this little device, I want to get into all that right now, so let's go and check it out. So the first thing that I want to mention with the Moto G is that there really isn't much in the box. Because this comes at a very low price point, they make sure to keep everything minimal. So inside the box, all you're going to get really is the phone. And you're also going to get a USB cable, so you don't have any kind of an adapter. Just keep that in mind. I would recommend going out and buying one. Motorola mentions that any charger that's between 500 milliamps and 1.5 amps should do the trick. Of course, you want to be careful with some third-party chargers that can be really cheap. So I would probably go to my local electronics store, or maybe you even already have an adapter from another phone. Just as long as it's not something that's really cheap and shoddy, I think you'd be just fine. One thing that I'm sure you all immediately noticed is that I don't have the black back cover on. It's actually right here. So you've just got some interchangeable back plates. You can get these off of Motorola's website or off Amazon. That's another really great place to get them, especially with Amazon Prime. So no, this did not come with the phone. This is something that I bought separate. So let's talk about the form factor of the phone. This is a very nice sized phone. I do have very small hands, so it might look deceivingly big, but this is indeed quite a manageable sized phone. For example, we have the iPhone 5S beside it. So you can see that this really isn't a huge phone. So it does have a bit smaller footprint than something like the Galaxy S4, but what you will probably mostly notice is the fact that it's very hefty. It feels quite heavy. And comparing it to something like the Galaxy S4's width, you can see that it is a little bit widthy. I would definitely not consider it a thin phone, so it does have quite a bit of thickness to it. But considering the price point, I have really welcomed the weight and the feeling of it in hand, because it does not give me the impression of being cheap at all. It's a very stable built phone. There is no creaking, no bending. There is nothing that I hear rattling. It's very, very solid. In fact, I've dropped this phone quite a few times and nothing has happened to it. I was running on the treadmill and accidentally knocked it because I had my earphones hanging out of it. The thing hit the treadmill really hard and flew across the room. There wasn't a single dent on it. It just amazed me. Another thing for people who have butterfingers or people who are more prone to dropping their device, this is quite a slippery device. I would foresee some people dropping it just because it is very slippery. The back cover has a nice matte feeling to it, but it just doesn't have enough grip. So if you are worried about dropping it, if you go on Motorola's website, you can get a back cover that has a grip on the sides. Motorola really did keep in mind that some people might have some trouble with the slipperiness of the device. So for 20 bucks, you can get a back cover that has a non-slip grip on the sides, and I don't think you'll have a problem anymore. But default, this is how it comes. So taking a bit of a look around the device, the first thing I want to point out is it's got Gorilla Glass 3 on it. I'm very happy to see Gorilla Glass 3 instead of Gorilla Glass 2 on this device. I really do think that it's helped me when I had dropped the phone a few times. There are no scratches on the display when I dropped it, and it did go face down. Keep in mind it was just on linoleum, but still it's nice to see that it does have that extra native damage protection. And in my experience, Gorilla Glass 3 is a little bit better at avoiding scratches than Gorilla Glass 2, so really thank you, Motorola, for putting high-end specs on this device. Another amazing thing about this device is that they call it water-resistant, maybe even splash-resistant, but I want to call it waterproof. So the internals are covered with a nano coating. So basically, if your phone gets waterlogged or any water gets inside of it, there's a nano coating that stands between the internal components and the water, so you don't get the phone short-circuiting and you will not damage your phone. So since I live in Seattle, I'm very happy that I can take this out into the rain and it just does not care if it gets wet. It does just fine, no problem. So we've got a 4.5-inch display. We've got a 1.3 megapixel front-facing camera, our receiver. You've also got an ambient light sensor and a proximity sensor that's hard to see here, and there's a notification LED right there. On the back, we have a 5 megapixel camera with a single LED flash. We've got this little divot here so that you can put your finger. I do think it helps with the feeling of holding the phone. It makes it quite comfortable. I know where to place my finger. It feels like a very sure hold on it. We've got a speaker here, which I will get into. On the top, we have a standard headphone jack. We've got a microphone here. We've also got a microphone here, so we do have noise-canceling microphones. That's nice to have on a mid-range device, I would call this. On the side, we've got our power button. We've also got a volume rocker, and they're nice and clicky. They do give a good amount of feedback. On the left-hand side, we've got nothing. It's just nice and smooth. On the bottom, we've got our micro USB port and that little microphone I already showed you. So you can see that the back has a nice matte feeling, and on the sides we've got this glossy plastic. I think that it gives it a nice contrast, especially when you have a back cover that's not black. You can really see it. So I do not call this an ugly phone by any means. Actually, with a nice back cover to your liking, it looks kind of nice. I do notice that after some time I do get quite a bit of smudginess on this back cover. It's got that matte texture to it, and I think it holds fingerprints. So it ends up looking pretty smudgy. So I end up taking the back cover off once in a while and washing it. It doesn't tend to show up as bad on this blue one. So I notice wiping it doesn't get rid of the smudges. It is something that I do have to take and wash once in a while. And you can see over time you do get minimal scratching. But with what's happened to this phone and how many times it's fallen, it really does look quite nice so far. So taking a look underneath the back cover, there is a special way to remove it. They are kind enough to show in the box how to remove this because for the life of me I could not figure out how to get this back cover off the first time. So kindly follow as they show here. So basically you take your thumb, you look where you've got the charging port, and you pull upward. You can see that that snapped very easily when you have that leverage with your thumb there. And it comes off very easily actually. So underneath the back here we have a micro SIM card slot. There is no place for expandable storage, so you're stuck with either 8 or 16 gigabytes. There really isn't a huge difference in pricing between the 8 and 16 gigabytes, so I can't imagine for the life of me why anyone would go with 8 gigabytes because as soon as you put a few applications on here, you're spent. So go with the 16 gigabyte version, do yourself a favor. And also the battery is not removable. I am curious to take this apart to see how that works exactly. Maybe that would be a future video. I'm bold enough. So keep in mind that there is no SD card slot and you cannot remove the battery. It's not removable by yourself unless you're one of those people who isn't faint of heart, but you probably will void your warranty. And you've also got a speaker grill here. So we can just pop that back on. Voila. And if you do need more storage, of course, you can just use an adapter and plug in a USB stick into it. It works just fine. So getting into the audio quality of the phone, I want to start off with the speaker on the back here. Let's open it up again. So you can see it's just this grill here. What I can say about the speaker is that I'm quite surprised at how loud it gets. With a phone at this price point, I figured it would be small, quiet, hard to hear. Possibly a phone that I would miss notifications on, but no, not at all. I don't have any trouble hearing it whatsoever. I don't have any trouble during navigation hearing it. I haven't missed any notifications or phone calls at all. Now, if you're somebody who likes to listen to music on their phone or wants the best speaker quality, you're not going to find that here. I do find that it's lacking quite a bit. The sound that comes from it really doesn't have much depth. I wouldn't call it tinny, but I would say it's kind of lacking in bass. Kind of has a thin sound to it. It definitely gets the job done, but it's not the best sounding speaker that I've ever heard. But I wasn't expecting much to begin with, so it does just fine for me. If you are somebody who likes to just pop your earphones in and enjoy some sweet tunes, one thing to pay attention to is immediately, please go underneath settings. Under device, it says sound. You can see that there is this little sinister thing here that's called audio effects, and you've got all kinds of equalizer settings that are on by default. So people complain, ooh, the music sounds terrible. What is happening with this thing? You can see that you can easily turn it off, which I would definitely do. I do hear a marked improvement in the audio quality with this off, so audio effects is a no-no. As far as the sound quality with the headphones plugged in, the sound is decent, although I noticed that I really can't get fully immersed in listening to music on it. I feel like it really muddles out some of the lower frequency range, and I don't feel like I get a strong bass from it either. It's really not a bad experience though, it just is kind of lacking in that richness. I'm not hearing any obvious distortions in the audio, although I can tell that there's quite a bit of crosstalk. So it doesn't have that stereo feeling that I like, but at least it does get reasonably loud, so it's not a phone where I'm wishing that I could just turn up more volume. It does quite well there. I think that most people will get out of it what they would expect, especially in this price range. So now taking a bit of a look at the display, it's a 4.5-inch LCD display. It's also IPS, so the good thing here is that I'm noticing the viewing angles are pretty decent. That's something that's very well appreciated. So the display is 720p, it's 326 pixels per inch, which is exactly the same pixel density as what's on the iPhone 5 and the iPhone 5S. So Retina display, but it's actually HD because it's 720 by 1280 at that 4.5 inches. So for those of you who have an iPhone or have seen an iPhone, you probably know how sharp the display looks. I think it looks quite nice. It's definitely not 1080p, but it still rocks for the price point. Now, in general, I'm pretty pleased by this display. I do have some measurements that I want to show you, but I don't feel like this display is lacking in color. And the colors don't look terribly off to me either. One thing that I do notice immediately is that the color temperature of the display, especially in midtones towards shadows, is pretty blue. And an interesting thing is that there seems to be some variations between the panels and the color temperature. I have had another unit of the Moto G, and that one was really quite blue. So I'm happy that this display is a little bit warmer in color temperature overall. So that's just something to pay attention to, that there do seem to be some types of variations going on with the displays. So taking a basic look at the calibration, it's actually not too bad. You can see that for red and green, they're pretty much along the Gamma 2.2 line. The place where it really goes wrong is for blue. Blue should be upright where green and red are. So taking a look at the color temperature of the display, it should be around 6,500 Kelvin, and you can see that around shadows it's skyrocketing past 9,000 K. Yeah, that's pretty blue. Now at least the whites are around 7,000 Kelvin, so that's not too bad. That's closer to neutral. That's probably the one thing that saves it for me. So I have to look at this and say, why Motorola? Why did you do this? Perhaps it has something to do with the backlight being very blue, and possibly Motorola just doesn't know what they're doing with the calibration. But I've seen flagships that have even worse various problems with calibration, so this is really not that bad. Now for outdoor visibility, it seems to do just fine. It's a little bit reflective, but once you have it on full brightness or auto brightness, which is going to jack it up to full brightness in direct sunlight, I can see everything just fine on the display. I am easily able to read the display, no problems whatsoever. So I think that people will be very satisfied with how it does in direct sunlight. Now getting into the battery and battery life, we've got a non-removable 2070 milliamp hour battery. So the battery is not a big battery, but I have no complaints about the battery life whatsoever. I'm going to show you some screen caps. What we've got here is 49%. It's been 10 hours during the day using it. And you can see at 49%, I have 3 hours and 31 minutes of screen time. And going further to just a few days ago, you can see I was able to hit 2 days, and I was able to get about 5 hours of screen time. So this is one device that I'm really not worried to run out of battery with. I'm quite confident to bring it with me through the day, and I know that I'm just not going to run out of battery power. This is one device that I keep on me, because if one of my other devices runs out, I know I can always turn to this one. Now keep in mind, it doesn't have a 1080p display, it doesn't have incredibly powerful processors, so I think that it's more than fair that the battery lasts as long as it does. The typical things I do throughout the day is answering emails, tweeting, other various social media, watching some YouTube videos, making some phone calls, chatting over Google Hangouts for many hours, taking some pictures, and this phone can do all of that without having any trouble at all. So if you're looking for a decent phone without all those really high-end specs and want to keep battery life in check, this device might be the one for you. Now moving on to performance and internal specifications, the first thing that I want to mention is that this phone is impressive. Yes, it doesn't have very high quality specs on the SoC side, but thus far I have had a very hard time fully realizing that this is not like a flagship device. It's a very quick, snappy little phone, Android 4.4.2 KitKat. Motorola has done a very great job here. It's a Snapdragon 400 SoC. It's got 4 Cortex-A7 cores clocked at 1.2 GHz, so yes, this is a quad-core device. We've got an Adreno 305 GPU, and I'm going to get into game performance as well. So I am quite fascinated by this device and just how snappy it is. It goes to prove that you really don't need to have hugely high-end specs to get very good performance out of a device. I love and appreciate the fact that it's pretty much vanilla Android. It looks just like vanilla KitKat 4.4.2. I really can't tell the difference. Besides a couple of applications that Motorola includes, which are actually useful by the way. And also they added their own camera application, thank goodness. So I will get into the camera application later as well. So they have added things like Motorola Assist, which gives a very much needed nighttime mode. So it really works as a do not interrupt mode. You can set the time, from which time to which time that you really need to have silence. You've also got a nifty meeting mode, which helps you avoid interruptions during the day. So you can see silence, keeps your phone quiet while you're busy. And you also have the ability to choose auto reply. You can go ahead and add whatever it is that you'd like to say, reply with a text message, and you can edit the text here. And underneath silence, you can choose to silence all, turns off ringtones and vibrate. You can allow vibrate only. Except when a favorite calls, so you can choose who your favorites are, or someone calls twice. So this is a very, very useful feature that just happens to be missing inside of KitKat by itself. Also underneath settings, they have a really neat mode that's called Meeting. If you go underneath Meeting, you can choose which accounts that you want Google to sync with, so that it checks out what's going on in your calendars. So if Assist sees an event that looks like a meeting, anytime it approaches that meeting, it's going to put it inside of meeting mode. So for example, I just added Moto G review, and it happens to be 7 p.m. As soon as I entered in Moto G review, it recognized it as a meeting, and now I won't be bothered. It's only going to accept the parameters that I put into it. So thanks Motorola, this really is quite a nice feature to have. I really love how it intelligently looks through all of my calendars, and is automatically able to turn this setting on without having to even remind me. So of course, if you're somebody who likes pure Android, you're going to love the interface. We don't have active listening, so we can't say, okay, Google. It's not going to activate. But of course, you can go ahead and hit on this, and it works just like it would normally for Google search. One thing that people always ask about is how many tabs or panels can you have? Well, it seems that there's 5, and you can't get rid of them either, and you can't add any more, so there's simply just 5. Default, it stays in the center. You've got 2 here and also 2 here. So that seems to be Motorola's own little implementation there. And if you hold down, it's going to bring you to wallpapers. It seems that we don't have a pinch function to be able to bring up settings along the bottom like I've seen on the Nexus 5. So you just need to go up in here so that you can access settings or underneath your app tray. The only other modification that I am seeing is one that I showed you earlier underneath sound, audio effects. I did say to keep this off because it just does not sound so nice. So that's something that's not included underneath vanilla Android. But otherwise, this is pretty plain Jane, and I like it. Continuing on with performance, one of the most notable things is that there's only 1 GB of RAM. A lot of devices these days, especially flagships, have 2 GB of RAM, sometimes even 3, and that's very, very helpful in day-to-day processes. One of the things that I am noticing is that there tends to be some launcher redraws, such as if I exit out of an application, sometimes we'll see that there's a circle going around until the launcher will pop back up again. And the other thing that I notice is that if I run an application, just say such as a game, I do tend to notice some app suspensions. So here's Badlands we've got playing here. And I'm just going to exit out of it really quick. We're going to go and open up the web browser, for example. Just going to my website. So it seems that within a couple of seconds of loading a web page, I could be just browsing through this webpage for only a few seconds. I go back into Badland, and you can see it's already forced it close. So that can be a little bit annoying. So just keep in mind that this does not have a lot of RAM, and you are going to have quite a bit of app suspensions, especially if I'm running an application and then I go into the web browser. That's when I notice it most. For some that might be bothersome, for others it might not be. Now getting into gameplay, what we have underneath the hood is an Adreno 305 GPU. Now compared to a GPU like the Adreno 320 or 330, when you're looking at things like benchmarks, you're definitely not getting the same frame rates or performance. But in the real world, I haven't seen too much of a struggle whatsoever. Surprisingly, gameplay is very, very playable. I do see some frames dropping here and there, but still even racing games are quite playable. So far, I really haven't seen anything that it can't handle. So don't be too concerned that it's got a lower end GPU. It does quite well. For what it is, I'm really quite satisfied with the performance. There's really not much to complain about. It handles everything I throw at it like a champ. Now getting into call quality and all that good stuff, there is something to say about the dialer on the Moto G. If you go underneath dialer, you notice that it looks a lot like what's on the Nexus 5. In fact, visually it looks just like what's on the Nexus 5. My one problem here is that if you type under here something like pizza, or you could say Domino's Pizza, nothing happens. On the Nexus 5, it brings up nearby places, but on the Moto G and even on the Moto X, it seems that Motorola does not have this. Supposedly, that's because this is the AOSP dialer. It's a completely different APK than what's on the Nexus 5. The Nexus 5 has a dialer that's entitled Google Dialer APK, and there's actually a way to download that dialer. You have to have your phone rooted. You can put the app where it needs to be and add the permissions, and then you can easily use the proper dialer and get nearby places when you type something in here. So it is possible, but it does not come with it. That was something that boggled me at first until I did some searching and found out, oh yeah, hey, it does look like what we have on the Nexus 5, but it's not. So if that's a feature that you envy or something that you've seen that you want, go ahead and do that. I'm actually going to put a link in the description. There is an easy video guide where a nice man decides to show everybody how to get that working. So just food for thoughts there. Otherwise, call quality is just okay. I don't hear any buzzing or worrying or anything like that in the background. It's just not the prettiest sounding voices. Voice quality is clear enough. It kind of has a bit of a muffled effect, but really it's not that bad. As for antennas like Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, it's 802.11, BGN. Keep in mind that we're missing the 5 GHz band, so it's only connecting to my 2.4 GHz band, and honestly, it's been just fine. They've had to make some cuts here in order to get the price down, but this is something that I'm overall not so worried about. What I'm more sad about is the fact that this does not have LTE. Supposedly, there's supposed to be an LTE variant coming to AT&T. I don't know when. And also, this does not have a dual carrier modem either. So the max speed that you're getting for download is 21 megabits per second. You don't get that combined bandwidth of 42 megabits per second. Does it make a huge difference? Well, to some people, probably not. For the market that this is going for, really, probably not. It is fast enough. Now, getting into a little bit more about the connectivity of this device, we officially have 3 different versions. We have the global GSM model, the US GSM model, and also a CDMA model. Now, if you're somebody like me who travels a lot and goes to Europe and back to the United States, it might be more beneficial to get the global model. What you're noticing right here for 3G is that we have the 900 band on the global model, but if you look at the US GSM model, we only have the 850 band. So when I took this device to France, sadly, I was only able to get Edge, which was even more insulting than having to just use plain 3G speeds. So if I could do it all over again, I'd probably go on Amazon and figure out how to get the global model. Although you can see on the US model, we do have the AWS band, which is something that you're not seeing on the global model. But still, we have the 1900 megahertz band, so even if you are to get the global model, you see you have 1900 and 850. So for 1900, you can easily use T-Mobile in a lot of places, because T-Mobile does use the 1900 megahertz band. And if you're on AT&T, you can use the 850 band. So I definitely think that the global model is a better buy. And if you're a CDMA person, well, there you go. Looking at you, Sprint and Verizon. And again, I've heard a rumor of an LTE model for AT&T, so we'll see where that leads. I haven't had any issues with Wi-Fi reception. Also, I'm happy that the GPS antenna is good. This is something that makes me very, very happy. Driving about Seattle, the GPS has worked like a champ. I had no problems whatsoever with latency, or having trouble telling me where to turn, or telling me that I'm on a different road than I really am. So yay, Moto G is a fully functioning GPS and works just fine. As for other radios, we don't have NFC, but the interesting thing is that we do have an FM radio. That's something that a lot of people really like to have. So here we are, proof there is indeed an FM radio on this little guy. Of course, you need to plug in headphones for the antenna. But this is a nice feature that some of the flagships don't even have. So, kudos. On the Moto G, we have Bluetooth 4.0, which is nice because you can use peripheral devices that support Bluetooth 4.0, just say like fitness devices and such. So just because you have a cheap device, you're not kept from using peripheral devices that support Bluetooth 4.0. So goody goody. So getting into cameras, we've got a 1.3 megapixel camera on the front here. And we've got a 5 megapixel shooter on the back. I have used this quite a bit for video calls. And the white balance can be okay, but I noticed that it tends to wash face tones out. So the front facing camera is just okay. Now for the back facing camera, I'm going to show you a lot of different images. I'm going to show you some video so you have a chance to make a decision for yourself. But I honestly don't think that the camera is that bad. It does indeed perform better than I thought it would. We're going to get into that in a second, but I want to show you the camera interface. So this is Motorola's own camera. Go ahead and just put something down for it to look at. So in the camera, if you slide from the left here, you can see that you have a wheel, and you are able to turn this wheel to get a couple of more options. So you have an HDR setting. It seems to take 3 separate exposures, shadows, midtones, and highlights, and seems to combine them together to try to get a high dynamic range. Under HDR, we have auto on or off, so it can decide whether it wants to use HDR or not. So I've kept it on auto and I've gotten some pretty good results. We've got a flash, so you have auto on off. We've also got a setting, control focus, and exposure. When you turn it on, it says control focus and exposure. Drag the bracket anywhere to set focus and exposure. This is a setting that I really like because it's just a metering. You can control the focus and exposure simply just by dragging this around. I find it very useful inside of the HDR mode or to try to get the exposure right in a tricky scene. So I do think it's an invaluable setting, much better than what they had before. I remember at one point that this setting did not exist, and so everything was just automatic. We've got a slow motion video mode, which films in 720p. We've got a panorama mode. You've got the option for geotagging. Now this is a 5 megapixel sensor. The sensor itself is a 4:3 aspect. So when you turn it on 16:9, it's going to knock down the resolution a bit, and it's going to also crop the image. So this is 3 megapixels, and the 4:3 aspect is 5 megapixels. I'm glad at least that the 4:3 aspect is 5 megapixels instead of the other way around. And you've also got the ability to turn the shutter tone on or off, which is always very good, especially if you're trying to be discreet. So this is a very simple interface. Otherwise, down here you're able to see if HDR is on. I think that just serves as a reminder. So here we have the ability to turn the camera to the front-facing camera. Hello. And you just hit the video button and it starts recording. Now just like the slow motion mode, the regular mode during video recording is only 720p. There is no 1080p option, so keep that in mind. Now everything is automatic in video, unfortunately. When you do touch the screen, it's going to take a shot in video. So it's a very simple interface. You can see you can pinch to zoom here and there. Now of course there is no optical image stabilization. I actually don't see any type of stabilization at all. But it's a very plain, simple camera. They did cut some corners, but I'm going to show you a video sample and I don't think it did that bad at all. Another feature of this camera that is fairly non-obvious is the fact that it's also got a burst mode, so you can just drag that around at will, whatever you want, get it in focus, and you can use volume up or down. So you can see it's just taking a series of shots here. I don't know how many pictures it's able to take. I was able to go above 100 and it wasn't stopping really at any point. I do think it's a little bit awkward because sometimes it slows down to at least a picture a second, and sometimes it'll speed up, so I don't know how practical this mode is. It's actually doing well right now. So it's not a very fast burst mode, But hey, it's on there. So now I'd like to show you some samples of pictures and also videos. Let's go and check those out. First, taking a look at some colors and images. I don't think that the color tones are too bad, but I'm noticing that it's having trouble burning images, and I think that the images just look too bright to me. Taking a look at some details, this is a 5 megapixel sensor, so it doesn't have a crazy resolution. But actually, I do see quite a bit of details in photos. Here we've got a little rabbity toy. You can see the fine details in his fur. We've also got some nice pebbles at La Push Beach, pretty much my favorite place to go. I can see quite a bit of details and colors in the rocks, so this is pleasing that it's a cheap phone, but still you don't lose so much detail. Even though I notice that the Moto G tends to make some images too bright in some circumstances, it does do well in others. Here we have an interesting scene at the beach. It's an overcast day, and it was able to expose properly and also get a lot of detail inside the image. My one gripe would be that it has difficulties with highlights. You can see that the brightest part of the photo is a bit burned. HDR still was not able to get rid of the burning. I happen to have the iPhone 5S with me for reference. This is without HDR mode in the iPhone 5S. And this is with HDR mode. In neither of the images do we have any burning. So here we have the HDR mode on. This is in Chambéry in France. And you can see that the sky is still burning. I took several pictures in succession to try to get that sky to expose properly, but I just wasn't able to do that. The colors are kind of interesting though. This picture has quite an effect to it. Still, I would not call the HDR mode bad. Here we have an image that is without HDR. The colors look kind of bland and solemn to me. And now we have the HDR image, which does bring quite a bit of life and brightness to the photo. So for me, it really has been hit and miss. So again, play around with the meter, play around with the exposure. It seems to be kind of hit and miss. I like that when cropping and taking a better look at the image, that this camera is consistently able to take sharp pictures. I really appreciate that even though the sensor isn't very high resolution, that the images don't come out soft and mushy looking. Now taking a better look, I do like that skies are not horrifically noisy. That's something that you do see with some cameras. And this is a cheap camera, and I'm surprised that I'm not seeing noise galore in the sky. When really pixel peeping, I can see some purple fringing here and there. And if I really want to get picky, I can see some sharpening artifacts such as halos along the outlines of the roofs here. All of these things aren't really so obvious, but one thing is, I really don't like the extra amount of chroma noise that I am seeing on every HDR picture that I take. I do see some chroma noise here and there in regular images, but HDR is just chroma noise galore. Overall though, the camera on the Moto G is passable to use on a day-to-day basis. If I got stuck in the middle of nowhere and this was my only camera to use at a party or something, I wouldn't feel too horrendous about it. I think people will like playing with the focus and exposure meter, getting different effects, playing with the HDR. As a backup and even a first-timer camera, it does just fine.
This is a camera test on the Moto G. Is this second beach? Which beach is this? Rialto Beach? Yeah, this is all rocks here. Just gonna see how the autofocus does. See if we can focus on some rocks, if it'll do that. I'm also curious to see how it does with audio, especially when we're looking at ocean water. So focusing back on myself, hopefully my shoes won't get wet. I am not gonna go too close, I swear. Just wanna go look at some water. Now, when you touch on this display, it's just going to take a picture in video. Ooh, now you can see all those trees as well. Hopefully the exposure isn't too bad. Let's go downward, look at some very heavily detailed rocks. Go upward and see how it does. And there's my family. Adjusting. At least the exposure actually adjusts pretty quickly, and that's a good thing.
review comes to an end, the last thing that I want to do is to put the Moto G in water. If absolutely nothing has impressed you about this phone so far, hopefully this will. Like I had mentioned, this phone was able to go underneath water for a half hour. Water was not able to even get inside of the camera. The phone just escaped completely unscathed. The speaker worked just fine afterwards. It still made phone calls. Nothing is wrong with it. Nothing. So I just want to make a point here. I can show you this right now. What we're going to do is we're going to make a phone call underneath the water. I found a random number to call for time. Let's go ahead and put it on speakerphone.
Apply today. LCNB is an equal opportunity lender.
All right. And here we go. It's just sitting there. Totally fine. Blub, blub, blub. Blub, blub. It just has no issue whatsoever. Touchscreen isn't going to work very well afterwards. We got to dry it off so that there's nothing touching the screen. So you can see here that there's absolutely no water underneath the camera lens after doing that. Let's go ahead and open it up. Just turn it off. See how the buttons are working still. It never did lose Wi-Fi reception underwater. You can see that it's all wet in here. Works just fine. Move it around, try to get it nice and soaking. This device just does not care what you do to it in the water. Now, I would not put it in salt water or in other types of corrosive water, but fresh water, it does just fine. Absolutely no water even gets underneath the display. That is just an impressive design, Motorola. Whatever you've done to seal this device from getting waterlogged, it's just fantastic. Still no problem. So I'm able to bring this out in the rain without any fears whatsoever. So if you're somebody who's a bit accident prone, when you drop this device, nothing happens to it. Of course, if you hit the pavement just right, you'll probably scratch the glass, but otherwise, it's a very hardy little device. Getting it wet's not going to do anything to it. So if you're someone who's accident prone, dropping it, or possibly even dropping it in the toilet, it's fine. Just seriously. If you don't believe me and you think there's some type of witchcraft or wizardry going on, I would recommend going and seeing the link in the description where you can see my entire video where I put it underneath the water for a half hour and still, nothing's wrong with it. So thank you everybody for watching. This has been Erica, the technology nerd who likes to film stuff. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. If you're looking for a hardy little phone that's cheap, $179 or $200 for the 16GB version, seriously. Check this device out. If you don't want to use this as your sole daily driver, this really does work great as a backup phone. Really great battery life. I really do want to call this waterproof. One of the first devices I've actually seen that you can truly waterlog. Water is just seeping in everywhere and nothing happens to it. So definitely do not dismiss this device. I know this is a device that I really do enjoy keeping in my pocket. Have a good night, you guys.